My 3-year-old son suffered from chronic ear infections last year, which led to him having high fevers. I slept with him on this particular night because I needed to give him Tylenol throughout the night to keep his fever down and keep him comfortable. I set my alarm to wake me up around 2:30 in the morning. When I woke up, I went into the kitchen to get the Tylenol. I noticed a bright light shining into the apartment from our deck door, which was also illuminated part of the woods behind the apartment. When I went over to see what it was, it turned out to be a car with those bright LED headlights in the parking lot, to the far back right of the apartment. I figured they were dropping someone off. I saw the movement of what resembled a dog walking around near the woods. I started to think that the lady who usually walks her dog in that area purposely faced her car in that direction so that she could see while she walked her dog. As it got closer, I realized that there was nobody out there walking a dog, and there was no dog. I don't know what it was that I saw, but I'll describe it in the best way I can. At first, it looked like a dog. It was about the size of a corgi, but as it walked closer, it looked like your average house cat. Then it looked like a black bear, and then it looked like a koala bear. I live in North New Jersey. It's a farmland and there's lots of woods, and there are no wild koalas here. At this point, my heart is pounding out of my chest and I am scared. The fear I felt was like a primal type of fear I have never felt before. I ran to my bedroom to wake up my boyfriend and I shook him awake very roughly. I said, "You gotta come see this." He was a bit annoyed with me. When we looked outside together, we see this thing getting closer and it looks like a skunk now. White stripe down the center with the perky fluffy tail. I said, "Oh, it's just a skunk," with a little chuckle. I felt a bit embarrassed that I woke him up over a damn skunk, but at that moment I also felt relieved. However, I was mistaken. As it walked, it looked as if it was struggling to find a form. I thought it looked like it was falling apart, but also coming back together again at the same time. I know this doesn't make any sense, but it's hard to find the words for what we saw. After the skunk formation, it looked like a person crawling on the ground with some type of fur or skin attached to them around the leg. Then it changed again and looked like a raccoon, groundhog, black bear, cat, koala, deer, and skunk. The part that stuck out to me the most was whatever it was seemed to be coming apart or shedding, but at the same time it was growing. Whoever had their headlights on turned them off as it went deeper into the woods. This happened pretty quick. I'd say it was only about a couple of minutes from start to finish. He ended up going back to bed, but I couldn't sleep after that. So I grabbed a flashlight and shined it into the woods to see if I could see it again, but it was gone. I also opened the door to see if I could hear anything, but I couldn't. It was very quiet. I had a very hard time going back to sleep after that. My boyfriend wasn't scared, but he was confused and stunned. He didn't know what to make of it. I was scared and just plain creeped out. I know if I hadn't woken him up to see it for himself, he most likely wouldn't believe me, and would have chalked it all up to me being groggy from just waking up, or it just being an animal. Unfortunately, I know what I saw, and I'll never forget it. I grew up in Belgium, Europe. Since I was young, I have been with my friends in the Scouts. It's a mix in Belgium. We do not have boys and girl Scouts apart usually. We start scouts when we're 6 years old, and then we go through all the groups until we're 18. This is when we become scout leaders usually. I am saying this to give you a little background on me and my friends. We are people who I would consider close with nature, camping and overall used to a lot of it. I would not say we are your typical rough outdoors lumber types of people, but we can manage ourselves well through a forest. Back when we were around 16 years old, one of my friends invited our group to go wild camping in the forest that we have close to our homes. It is not your average American national park, with stories of Bigfoot or worse, but it definitely has its own charm and legends. We got a centuries-old tale about werewolves in our forest, and a couple of legends about witches. It is not a huge forest, but one can easily get lost if they are not familiar with its trails, and all the trees look the same. This being said, to describe it the best that I can, we were very familiar with the forest since we were small children playing in the tree line, and afterwards as teenagers, being blindly dropped with nothing but a map in the middle of it by our leaders. I do not know whether this game is popular in other countries in the Scouts, but in Belgium it is very well known, and quite safe actually. We do not have bears or, until a year back, wolves. And when dropped, we would carry lights so just in case anyone didn't manage this, or find her way out, they could get spotted easily by a searching party. Again, this is not a national park that is so huge a person could go missing for days. That being said, again, we were very familiar with the forest, and we were all locals from the village nearby. So we started our camping journey with our bikes from the village to the entrance of the forest. And once there, we would continue to the deeper parts of the forest on foot. Since it was an area with lots of hills and few trails for bikes, the mood was good. It was a beautiful, although a bit cold autumn evening, with few clouds and a beautiful sunset. We hiked our way through the forest until we got to a small clearing with some grass, and prepared our tents for the night. We made a small campfire. We always learned to be safe, never putting in danger for the forest, and ate some beans and sausages for dinner, together with some tasty Belgian beers. Around 11 p.m., we decided to call it a night, and we each went to sleep in our tents and sleeping bags. Everything seemed like a normal camping day in our forest. Then, suddenly, around 1:30 a.m., we woke up to the sound of what seemed to be like drums. A couple of us got out of our tents with our flashlights, asking what was going on. Our forest had always been a quiet place at night, and during the day the only noise you could hear were the critters, so you can imagine the surprise of hearing drums in the middle of the night. We were located on a flat area on the side of a hill to have a beautiful view in the morning, and at the other side of the hill, over the top, we saw light and smoke of what seemed a bonfire. We figured that had to be the place where the drum noise was coming from. So the ones who had gotten out of our tents decided to just go over there to see what was going on, and maybe talk with the people who decided that it was a good plan to be making noise in a calm forest at 1:30 in the morning. We hiked over the hill so that we could have a glance at the people to know who we were dealing with at first. We walked about 15 minutes before we could actually see the bonfire. It was located in a small circled clearing with lots of trees and bushes around. We crouched towards the bushes in the tree line to get a look at what was going on that it was. And what we saw were the people with the drums. A couple of them, I recall a group of 5 or 6, sat around the fire playing the same tune on the drums the whole time. And another group of people were dancing around the bonfire. Although I say dancing right now, I mean people making weird, unnatural movements, almost as if they were having spasms, and honestly, the best way to describe it is bodies contorting. The people dancing around the circle were wearing suits. A first glance would make it look like people dressing to be one with nature. A second glance would make it look like pagan suits, almost like the original celebrations of Halloween. This was when we realized that whatever these people were doing, whether it was some sort of gag or seriously some sort of ritual, we would be better off if we did not confront them. So we decided to back off and go back to our camping spot as quietly as possible. Once there, we decided to wake the rest of them and tell them what we had seen. We packed up the same moment and left to the entrance of the forest, got on our bikes and all went back home. We have since still frequented this forest, both for scouts and our free time with friends and family, and we have never seen this circle of people again. However, it's stuck with me ever since, and I will never forget how we felt out of our place in the forest for the first time in our lives. It is the first and luckily the last time that we did not feel welcome in our own forest. I was homeless for a few years from 2018 to 2021, and I used to stay in a tent with my ex. I always had to end up moving my tent spot, especially because the cops would find us. Either way, I had spent a lot of time in the woods at night. One night, when walking back to my tent, I heard something down the trail a bit. I shined my flashlight in the direction of the sound to be met with glowing eyes reflecting my flashlight. However, where the eyes were made it so whatever I was looking at was taller than me, and I'm 5'8". There is no animal that tall in my area. I turned to my ex and tell him to start going to the tent faster. He could tell something was off, so he asked if I was alright. I told him I'll tell him what we saw when we get to the tent, because I have always been told not to acknowledge such creatures or spirits, as it gives them more power. Then, some nights there would be smacking on our tent. It would hit all the sides of the tent. We would look out the tent windows and check outside the tent, but we would never find anything or hear any footsteps. Another night during the summer, we had decided to go for a small hike at night because it was way more of a tolerable temperature. About 15 minutes into the hike, I had started feeling paranoid, like I was being watched. About 5 minutes later, I heard a maniacal laugh coming from somewhere in the woods. I couldn't pinpoint which direction though. My ex asked what was that, and I loudly said, I don't know, but whatever the fuck it is, it needs to stop. As soon as I said this, multiple maniacal laughs now started. My ex and I turned around, walked back for what felt like the longest 20 minutes. Another time I found a severed coyote head with something hung in the tree beside it that had a tooth in it. And lastly, one time, I was with my friend parked on the road far into the woods, so we could smoke. The passenger window was cut down, which was where I was sitting. The woods were right next to me. Again, the feeling of being watched overwhelmed me. 2 minutes or so later, I hear a hello, and then John coming from the woods. I tell my friend to turn around and we need to leave. I didn't tell her why, because like I said, I don't like to acknowledge these things until I'm far away from them. That's all that immediately comes to my mind at the moment. So, for our last night, we had rented an off-grid cabin in a remote area in the woods in upstate New York. To give some locals an idea, we were like half an hour drive from Harrisburg, I think. Me and Lisa had decided to spend one night in this cabin because it was one with nature. The cabin was super old, made from log wood, and there was no running water or electricity. Both me and Lisa had experience with survival in the wild in Europe. I, for myself, had been a Boy Scout my entire life and was even a scout leader for a while. Our other two friends were, as much as I loved them, purebred city girls. They had pretty much zero experience with camping, or to just be in the place where there is no service for phones, as was the case in this cabin. We had been driving all day to get there, and when we reached the beginning of the forest, it was already past 10 p.m., and it was really dark that night. While driving to this place, we lost internet connection with the GPS, and so I had to drive to the cabin on intuition paired with a good old-fashioned map, hoping for the best while trying to drive safe on these muddy trails. It was also rainy the whole day. On the way there, Anna and Charlotte were in the back of the car, and the moment they lost phone service, they got pretty uneasy for the rest of the ride. All of a sudden, in the pitch black darkness of the forest, we saw a campfire. But there were no houses around, or people, just a campfire. A well-organized one, since the fire was not spreading, and it was not as big as a bonfire. It kind of startled all of us, as this was a little bit weird, since there was no one around and we were really deep in the forest already. Plus, it was getting very late. When this happened, we also reached the end of the trail, and we figured we had taken the wrong trail at a crossroads before. So I turned around and we were on our way again. Half an hour later, and a couple of wrong trails later, we finally had arrived at our destination, as we could finally see the first glimpse of this godforsaken cabin in the middle of nowhere. To give you an idea of how old it was, the toilet was made out of wood and was outside of the cabin. When we arrived, it was still raining, and both Anna and Lisa were definitely not in the mood for getting out of the car and get in a cabin with zero lights. So me and Lisa left the lights on the car and went inside the cabin, while also using our phone flashlights to check the cabin out and see what we could find if there were any old flashlights, which we did, and to see if we could turn them on the fireplace, which we didn't because all the wood was still wet from the rain, and it seemed no one had prepared dry wood anywhere. So, with a couple of old flashlights and a small improvised fire, I managed to make it into the stove. We all four got in the cabin and I started to make us some pasta. Meanwhile, the girls were preparing the beds and closing the windows since it was already cold in this part of the state. The cabin had a small ladder which led to an elevated room with a bed where all three of the girls could fit in, and I would sleep downstairs in a bunk bed that seemed older than the First World War. While making pasta, Anna, one of the city girls, came up to me and, knowing that both Lisa and Charlotte did not like to hear anything scary at night, told me that she had seen an old cemetery in the middle of the forest on the way to our cabin, and that she had seen a figure walk around there. I first laughed it off as nothing. As I mentioned in my previous story, I do not consider myself a big believer of scary stuff. Being from Spain, we take promises very serious. To swear on God is very serious for us, and she swore to God that she was not lying. I told her then that I believe her, but that there was no need to panic as I would lock all the doors when we would go to sleep. We had some pasta, managed to make a couple s'mores, and drank a couple beers, or at least I did. They all had just one. I can assure you that I am not drunk after a couple beers, and that I would never start to hallucinate. Just saying in case anyone thinks I saw stuff because of the beer. They all three went to sleep pretty early after finishing the s'mores and their beer, and I, considering that I really love the outdoors and that I don't really mind a little bit of rain, Decided to take my last beer and a flashlight outside to the front porch, also very old and made of wood, and sat myself down with my beer while enjoying the sound of rain and the lovely sight of not seeing a single light in the distance. I could greatly appreciate this coming from New York City, and I just scanned the area around with my flashlight. There was nothing much really to see, besides a lot of trees and a small creek a little further away. All I could hear was the wind, the rain, and the running water down in the creek. That was until I suddenly heard what I would describe as a weird roar. The first thing that came to my mind was a bear, but I had researched well before our trip, and I knew bears were not common at all in this part of the state. I also know what a bear roar would sound like, and it did not resemble a lot, except from the fact that it was a deep roar. If you get what I mean. Startled, but not really scared, I continued to scan the rest of the forest for as far as I could see from the porch. It was when my eye caught the glimpse of a figure, well hidden deep into the tree line. I would describe the figure as tall. As a reference, I am 6'4", and I thought this thing was at least a foot or two higher than me. It was well hidden because with its brown fur, that is what I thought it was at least, or the skin in any case, blending in well with the trees in autumn, it was definitely aware of our presence. As I saw two eyes glimpsing into my flashlight, I could not tell what it was, but I swear to God that it was not a bear. It was bipedal and had rather long arms, I would say. We looked at each other for what seemed an eternity, but in reality it was more like 5 seconds before it vanished behind a tree, and I heard another roar. It was then when I felt all of my hairs stand up, and I was definitely very scared. I went inside as quickly as I could, and I locked all the doors and closed all the curtains. I quickly went to bed and tried to wave it off as just my exhaustion of driving all day playing tricks on my mind. But I promise you this was very real. After an hour or so, I had calmed down and finally fell asleep. The rest of the night was uneventful, and the next morning when I went to relieve myself after having drank beer the night before, the weather had cleared and it was rather sunny. As far as I could see, the forest was calm and beautiful. No sight of any animals or anything abnormal. We had a nice breakfast that morning and left for our way back to the city that never sleeps. And so ends also my story of that night. I never talked about what I saw that night, because I know all 3 girls did not like to hear scary stories. And I figured, after these months, that this was the best place to share it. If anyone has any idea of what it could have been, please feel free to enlighten me, especially if it is backed up with rational reasoning.